Election integrity hearings and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is on the other side of the camera, and it is Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer. I want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast, which is called Election Integrity Hearings. Why? Well, on Capitol Hill, there were just hearings about election integrity, and Senator Johnson, who is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, had hearings about this election that just occurred last November. And so we're talking about this today. We have a number of clips from this hearing. It's really kind of interesting because you get an idea of what both parties think about making elections more secure, making elections more trusting, making elections more reliable for the American people so that they can trust the results. There is, without question, one party who wants to do that, and there's one party, in my opinion, that does not. And you're going to hear that from these clips. We're spending some time on this podcast because nothing is more important to save our republic than to make sure that our elections are reliable and that people trust the results. We all know that. Well, we have a number of clips from this. As I said, Senator Johnson, he's from Wisconsin, and he seems like just an all-around good Midwestern kind of guy. Kind of says it the way it is at the hearing. He's the chairman of the committee. And we have the first clip from him. He just gives his opening remarks about what the problem is. We have that clip, and here it is.
Let me start the hearing by saying this hearing should not be controversial. It really shouldn't be. This is something I think we all should want to restore the confidence in our election system. A week ago, when I gave notice to this hearing, there were more standing issues and court cases than there are today. But even though courts have handed down decisions and the Electoral College has awarded Joe Biden 306 electoral votes, a large percentage of the American public does not believe the November election results are legitimate. This is not a sustainable state of affairs in our democratic republic.
It is not. It is not a sustainable state of affairs for our democracy and for our republic. And it's not sustainable because as long as you have an election and people after the election don't agree or believe, more importantly, they don't believe that the results are fair and that the election was fairly executed, then you really don't have a republic very long. And so we have a second clip from Senator Johnson. We're going to build on these clips, okay? Here's the second clip from Senator Johnson talking about how election integrity should be bipartisan. Well, duh, of course it should be bipartisan, but he has to say this because we live in a time now where there's one party that doesn't believe in election integrity, and we're going to explain what that is and why. And here's that clip.
With less than a month left in my chairmanship of this committee, the examination of irregularities in the 2020 election will obviously be my last investigation and last hearing as chairman. But oversight into election security should continue into the next Congress because we must restore confidence in the integrity of our voting system. As I said at the start, this effort should be bipartisan. In my statement announcing this hearing, I stated its goal was to, quote, resolve suspicions with full transparency and public awareness. What's wrong with that?
It's right. So that's so uniquely Midwestern, right? It's like, what's wrong with transparency? What's wrong with resolving the suspicions that entire parties have and entire populations have in our country that the election wasn't fair? There's nothing wrong with that. But as you'll see, as we move on to these other clips, apparently there's one senator that, he's one of many, but we can only do so many clips. But that particular senator talks about the fact that he doesn't think it's right. But before you hear that, here's the heart of the issue of election integrity, the very heart of the issue. And we want you to listen to this clip, and here it is.
The fact that our last two presidential elections have not been accepted as legitimate by large percentages of the American public is a serious problem that threatens our republic. I do not say that lightly.
Yes, 2 elections in a row where people don't trust the results. The first election that we're talking about is the 2016 election where Donald Trump was elected, and one party actually planted right after the election that it was the Russians that got Donald Trump elected, and then spent 3 full years, 3+ years, actually, a little bit more than 3 years, not only trying to convince the American people that that was the case, but investigating the president, and that was President Trump, and then actually successfully impeaching him, not removing him, but impeaching him. And that happened not just the last election, but for the past 3+ years. So all Senator Johnson is trying to do is have a committee hearing on election integrity and talking about how important it is to save our republic, number one, and number two, that it should be a no-brainer. It should be bipartisan. It should be transparent. What's wrong with that, he says? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong with that is Michigan Senator Peters from Michigan. Now keep in mind, Senator Peters from Michigan just defeated John James, who is a black Republican superstar in Michigan. And there are many people in the state of Michigan who believe that there were, a lot of election irregularities, not just in the places you would expect them in Detroit, but also in Antrim County, where actually votes were flipped by the Dominion system. At least that is the allegation, and there are videos out there, you can watch them, you can determine for yourself whether you think it's true or not, but more information is coming out about those systems. So Senator Peters, of course, is really concerned that any kind of discussion about the election and election integrity might actually, overturn his election in Michigan. That's really what's going on here, which is just fascinating, right? Because you either are for election integrity or you're not. And we all know what election integrity is. We all know what it means. Nonetheless, listen to what Senator Peters has to say about this. Here he is.
But let me be clear. Deciding to move forward with this hearing is still dangerous. Elected leaders who are chosen by the voters to help uphold our institutions and democratic values spent weeks either turning a blind eye or parroting provocative rhetoric and false claims about this election. By not speaking out earlier, even though they knew it was wrong, that there was no evidence to support these claims, and that this inflammatory rhetoric is harmful to our democracy, many elected officials gave the president and his supporters license to spread damaging lies about the election.
So, can you look? He said, Senator Peters, you heard it here. He said it was dangerous to have hearings on election integrity. It was dangerous. It was dangerous to engage in transparency. And as I said before you heard that clip, it's because Senator Peters was just reelected in Michigan as a United States Senator. And Senator Peters is concerned that as more light is shown on the election in Michigan, we might find out that there's a lot of election fraud. A lot. Okay? I'm not saying that there is, or we know about it. I'm saying that we know about some election fraud for sure in Michigan, but as I said before, we know about Antrim County and we know about Detroit, Michigan, where apparently you had, large vote dumps in the middle of the night. And you've heard about that, of course, ad nauseum. So why not have a hearing so that you can watch and listen and be transparent about how we fix these concerns, how we fix people's distrust of the system? Well, Ron Johnson rebutted, of course, Senator Peters. And Ron Johnson, of course, gets really hot in his rebuttal, really upset, because it was Senator Peters who said that Senator Johnson and Senator Grassley were intentionally disseminating Russian propaganda about Hunter Biden. Now think about this. Senator Peters, prior to the election, said that Senator Johnson and Senator Grassley were engaging in Russian propaganda, about Hunter Biden because, Hunter Biden couldn't possibly be colluding with various foreign governments to enrich himself by using his family name. No, that was Russian propaganda. So Senator Peters literally said to the American people that it was Senator Johnson and Grassley that were doing just that. In other words, they themselves were Russian agents. That Johnson and Grassley were Russian agents and involved in what? In disseminating Russian information. So Johnson gets really upset after he hears Senator Peters saying it's dangerous to have these hearings. And here is Senator Johnson's rebuttal. Here it is.
So it's just galling, and I just have to point out that the purveyors of Russian disinformation, Hillary Clinton's campaign, the DNC, the Steele dossier, the ranking member Peters accusing Senator Grassley and I of disseminating Russian disinformation, that's where the disinformation is coming. That's where the false information, the lies, the false allegations. I can't sit by here and listen to this and say that this is not disinformation, this hearing today. This is getting information we have to take a look at to restore confidence in our election integrity. We're not going to be able to just move on without bringing up these irregularities, examining them, and providing an explanation, and see where there really are problems so we can correct it moving forward. Senator Paul.
Mr. Chairman, I got to respond to that. I mean, you're saying I'm putting out information. Well, one, it had nothing to do with this report.
You lied repeatedly.
I did not.
You lied repeatedly in the press that I was spreading Russian disinformation, and that was an outright lie. And I told you to stop lying, and you continue to do it.
Mr. Chairman, this is not about airing your grievances. I don't know what rabbit hole you're running down.
You talked about Russian
down rabbit
disinformation.
holes.
Senator Paul.
This is simply not what we're dealing with.
And you wonder why the American people are so concerned about election integrity. Because we have one party, the Democrat Party, and there you heard Senator Peters, you heard his exchange with Senator Johnson. You have one party, the Democrat Party, via Senator Peters, talking about, let's not talk about Russian interference and so forth, even though that's what he's been talking about for now for 4 years in his case, including about Hunter Biden and saying Hunter Biden is innocent and it's the Russians who are putting this information out there. And you have one party that doesn't want any kind of transparency about elections and trying to improve them. All the usual stuff that everybody knows that we need, which is you got to vote in person, you got to bring a voter ID. And if you have to vote by mail, then you need to show a daggone good reason why you have to vote by mail. Otherwise, you better show up and vote in person with an ID. And if you do vote by mail, you also have to provide ID to prove it was you that actually voted. And we got to basically prove and show and demonstrate that your signature matches the signature that is on file, because we want to know it was you that voted. Maybe even call the person actually directly. Include your phone number when you vote by mail, so that the election board can call you and say, hey, was it you that actually voted by mail? I mean, there are so many commonsensical ways that we can correct the system. And all Senator Johnson wants to do is to have a hearing about election integrity to restore confidence in our system. And yet we have a Democrat Party that all they want to do is to continue down this Russian hoax nonsense. And they don't even want to talk about how to make improvements. And now that all Senator Johnson wants to do is to talk about what happened this election and what happened in the various states and how do we improve it. And of course, everybody, no, let's not talk about that. That's impossible. We can't. So that's Senator Johnson wrecks Senator Peters. And you just heard that firsthand. Great job, Senator Johnson. So next up, Obama says Republicans are the minority party. That's right. President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, says Republicans are the minority party. On the Daily Distancing Show with Trevor Noah, Barack Obama basically said, the Republicans think they're the majority party, but they're actually the minority party. There are built-in advantages that make you think they're the majority party, or that there are more of them. You got to listen to this carefully. Here's why. Because we're going to talk about what Barack Obama is actually saying to Trevor Noah, as well as to Trevor Noah's listeners. Listen very carefully. Here's the first clip. Here it is.
The Republican Party is the minority party in this country. The only reason that it doesn't look like they're the minority party is because of structures like the U.S. Senate and the Electoral College that don't render them the majority party. So they have certain built-in advantages around power, given their population distribution and how our government works.
So the Republicans have built-in advantages in the way our government works because of the Electoral College and the United States Senate, structures. Those structures, folks, are the Constitution of the United States. And Barack Obama is literally saying that he doesn't support, and he has said this before, he doesn't support the Electoral College, and he does not support the United States Senate because he doesn't think each state should have 2 U.S. senators. He thinks big states like California should have lots and lots of senators. And how would that work out, right? We've talked about this before. Do you know that the state of California has almost 40 million people? And the state of California's population is the same population as 21 other states and the District of Columbia combined. So what are you going to do? Give California all of those senators? And then what kind of government would we have, of course, if you got rid of the United States Senate, or if you had the proportional relationship, the United States Senate, and you didn't give states any kind of opportunity to as minorities, because they're minorities because of their small populations, to be able to have any say in government. But Barack Obama doesn't care. He wants to get rid of that. Because Barack Obama's idea of a minority is someone who is black, right? I mean, that's his idea of a minority. The founders believed that minorities were people who had different ideas. They had diversity of thought. And the founders didn't want those folks with different ideas and different ways of living for their rights to be trounced upon by the majority. But Barack Obama, once again, he wants to shred the Constitution of the United States first and foremost, get rid of that pesky old Senate in the United States Senate, and second, get rid of the pesky old Electoral College. So we have a second clip of Barack Obama with Trevor Noah. And Obama says Republicans don't have to work hard because, they're kind of like all the same. I mean, I'm sorry. That's a racist statement. We have it, and here's the clip.
I describe in the book the first time I go to the Republican House caucus to speak to them. And I think there was an Asian guy or gal and maybe a couple of Hispanics, and that was it. It is much more homogeneous, which means that, yes, they have to do less work, but it also means that they can talk to themselves, and as a consequence of the way our democracy, our republic is structured, they don't have to appeal to as broad of a base. That's not fair.
So representative democracy, isn't fair, right? To have a republic, right, because we're a republic, whereby you elect people to represent you at the national level, that isn't fair. Because if you're a Republican and you're representing an area in, let's say, northern Michigan, then you don't really have to work hard because you're just kind of talking to a bunch of people who are just like you. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that is a fundamentally racist statement. But have you noticed how well he says it? He says it so well, it seems so okay, right? Because, and by the way, had anyone else said this, name the person, right? Name the person, especially if they have an R behind their name, forget it. They would have been shredded in the media. But Obama gets away with this stuff all the time. I mean, he literally is the ultimate race baiter, but he does it so carefully and craftily by saying, Republicans are homogenous, so therefore, since they're all kind of the same, they don't have to work really hard. And when he went to reach over the aisle as president of the United States, he sold like an Asian and a couple of other people, maybe a couple of Hispanics, so they really aren't diverse. It's like, once again, this is the classic identity politics of Barack Obama and the Democrat Party. Diversity to them is the way you look. Republicans, diversity is the way you think. And it's really kind of obvious. So here is Obama again on Trevor Noah talking about BLM. This is really going to send you, it's going to make you crazy. It's going to make you so upset. Barack Obama is talking about BLM, Black Lives Matter, and what has happened over this summer. And he's talking to Trevor Noah about this. You got to listen to this clip. Here it is.
What's been fascinating while I've been on this book tour is, people have asked me what's my source of optimism, and uniformly what I have said is nothing made me more optimistic during a very difficult year than the activism that we saw in the wake of George Floyd's murder and Black Lives Matter.
So can you imagine? He really was happy about the activism of Black Lives Matter. And he talked about that in great detail with Trevor Noah. So you mean that he was okay with all the rioting, that kind of activism, with the looting, with the burning? He was okay with the raping and the killing and the stabbings? Now, to be fair, I'm sure that Barack Obama would say, "Oh no, I mean that's okay." I mean that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the fact that they were out protesting peacefully, folks. The protests quickly devolved into massive riots in major cities across America. And if you were a former president of the United States, you have an obligation to talk about the fact that that was wrong. But did you hear Barack Obama say anything about whether it was wrong? I can tell you, I listened to this entire interview, and never once did he say that anything that he saw on the streets about rioting was wrong. And this is why this guy is so dangerous, this former president of the United States. He's always been a dangerous president because he race baits constantly and basically is trying to categorize people, classic identity politics, and then basically praises BLM. And if you want any further proof, I mean, BLM just recently passed some rulemaking and policy making in New York City, whereby the New York City Teachers Union passed a BLM at school resolution calling for, among other things, disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family, which of course is classic Marxism, right? Let's get rid of the nuclear family, because you don't need dads in the household, you don't need moms in the household, right? It can just be anything that you want it to be because, let's face it, not having dads in the household, that hasn't wreaked havoc on black families and on white families and families across the country. I mean, that has no impact on the kid's future. I mean, this is a new kind of stupid. And does Barack Obama talk about any of those things? I mean, no, he basically says he admires BLM. He said this on Trevor Noah. He said not only does he admire BLM, but he wish, kind of like he had thought about it because it's really great marketing with BLM, the way they've approached this. And it's great organizing, and they did a much better job than he could have done. He wished he had actually thought about it. He wished he had actually done something about that himself, before he became president and when he became president, because then he could have organized his own army. Look, there are a lot of people that are out there now that believe that is Barack Obama's army, which is, in my opinion, a Marxist army. And I want to tell you something. I want to make this very clear. There are members of BLM, right, people that are not involved in the upper echelon of BLM, that have legitimate concerns about what happened to George Floyd, right? I mean, makes perfect sense. And that, of course, we 100% agree, right? But an organization that wants to get rid of the patriarchy, an organization that's based on Marxism and Leninism, this is what Barack Obama thinks is okay because he doesn't even believe in the Constitution. He wants to get rid of the Electoral College. He wants to get rid of the United States Senate. He doesn't want any kind of representation. He's basically calling the Republican Party the party of white people and white men in particular. I mean, this is who this ex-president really is. He is, as he always was in my mind, a dangerous man and a Marxist. And that is, Obama says Republicans are the minority party. Next up, we have, is the pandemic good for MSNBC's ratings? Of course it is. It's also good for CNN's ratings. And what do we mean by that? Well, MSNBC and CNN, I think, want to extend the pandemic as long as they can because it helps their ratings. It gets you and keeps you glued to the TV because you're so fearful and terrified of the pandemic. This is what they've done to their viewers. And they have not provided, in my opinion, useful science and useful information to their viewers during this entire year because they only care about the presidential race. And now that the presidential race is over, now that it's over, MSNBC and CNN were trying to find the new way to keep viewers glued to their TV set and onto their shows. So we have MSNBC's Dr. Vin Gupta, MD, Dr. Vin Gupta saying, don't travel even after you've been vaccinated and keep wearing masks. It's like, we're going to keep the pandemic going because that way you'll keep watching us at MSNBC and you'll be terrified. And we're going to keep you terrified because that's the only way we can keep you engaged with our TV station. We had that clip and here it is.
Are you getting your vaccination this week?
Tomorrow morning, and I'm grateful for it. Chuck, I just wanted to say, just a follow-up on what Yasmin mentioned. Just for your viewers out there, I know one of the individuals who we just saw getting vaccinated is planning on traveling after the second dose. This is a source of confusion, but no, this is one of the misperceptions here. Just because you get vaccinated with that second dose does not mean you should be participating in things like traveling in the middle of an out-of-control pandemic or that you're liberated from masks. Mm-hmm. Everything still applies until all of us get the 2-dose regimen. And we don't think that's going to happen until June, July. And again, this goes back to what we just talked about, Chuck. We don't know if just getting the vaccination prevents serious illness, or does it also prevent you from getting infection entirely, meaning you can still get infected with the virus potentially and pass it on to others. So really, really critical. Don't let your guard down just because you got vaccinated. You still might be able to get infected with the virus and pass on others. So please keep that in mind.
Yeah, well, then why get vaccinated, right? I mean, why even bother getting vaccinated if you can't go back to living your life in a normal way? This is classic MSNBC. They want to keep their viewers terrified because that way you will continue watching their stupid channel. And look, you just heard a doctor, Vin Gupta, on MSNBC say, yeah, even after you get vaccinated, you shouldn't travel. That's nonsense. If you want to travel, travel based on your own unique circumstances, right? And then you want to continue to wear a mask and you want to continue to live in fear and you can't go back to normal because we won't really know what normal looks like until maybe June or July of next year. Maybe. Does anyone listening to this podcast think even for 1 minute that we get to June or July of 2021 and we're not going to hear the same crap in 20 or 21 in June or July? Well, the pandemic is still going on. We got to be terrified. We must live in terror because we can't go back to normal. We must continue to quarantine. We must stop indoor dining. You can't go to a bar. I mean, this is the same stuff. It's not going to end unless we end it. And the vaccine starts the beginning of the end. And if you get vaccinated and based on your own unique circumstances, whatever you decide to do, whether you get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated, it's up to you how you want to live your life at this particular point in time. And I would not be watching MSNBC for information. But they want you to stay there because that's how they make money, right? A channel makes money by keeping you engaged and watching the channel. And whatever it takes, at least that's MSNBC. And if you think that's bad enough, CNN's doing the same thing. So here's CNN's Jake Tapper. He interviews a very smug Bill Gates. They talk about the election and also, of course, about the pandemic. I'm sorry, I don't trust Bill Gates as far as I can see him about pandemics and about this particular issue. I don't, okay? And the reason I don't is because he has a nonprofit charity that's engaged in inoculations and also doing pandemic studies. It's kind of weird, right, that this really rich billionaire guy is involved in this, and it kind of makes you wonder about whether there's a profit motive or some other motive. I'll tell you what I think his motive is. Well, first up, here's the clip.
You've generally held your tongue when it comes to criticizing outgoing President Trump and the Trump administration for the various ways that he has mishandled the pandemic. Now that his term is coming to a close, I wonder what you think about the fact that it seems fairly clear that mistakes he made and statements he made that were just not accurate, undermining people like Dr. Fauci, undermining people who were talking about what would work in terms of mask wearing, pushing drugs that were not proven, including one from that MyPillow guy. I'm wondering what you think about the fact that, as Dr. Fauci told me, this has cost lives, this mishandling and the delay in the president taking it seriously, not to mention, of course, just what we've seen over the last 9 or 10 months?
So that was the really long question from good old Jake Tapper. It was your classic asymmetric questioning, right? Isn't Donald Trump awful? Didn't he do an amazingly bad job, just an awful job with this pandemic? And he told people to take drugs along with the My Pillow guy. You know, you can't take certain drugs, and he was really pushing those drugs, which we've discussed before, you know, because he's talking about hydroxychloroquine. And we have Bill Gates' response. We have a couple of those, actually. Here's Bill Gates' response.
You know, it could have been worse. He could have fired Dr. Fauci. He could have kept Scott Atlas on longer. You know, we'll do the postmortem when it's over. All of us feel like, you know, how could I have talked even louder in 2015 and gotten more investments to be made? You know, we should all look at what we have learned from this epidemic, because there will be another epidemic coming. And whatever that administration is, you know, being smart about getting the testing up fast, allowing the CDC, who are the experts, to give the message to the public, not being afraid of bad news, so that we get people ready. You know, that it's pretty clear we're going to be smarter next time.
Does Bill Gates, here's my question, does Bill Gates make money from the pandemic because of his charitable involvement? I'm not really sure, okay? But these are good questions to ask because how's Bill Gates an expert anyway? Okay, I mean, he's an expert on software. He's an expert on running a company, obviously one of the very great companies in American history. What does he know about pandemics? And of course, I know the viewers are like, whoa, it's because he has a charity and he's putting billions of dollars to help people. Okay, that's a good thing. But wouldn't you think at this particular point in time, as we're getting towards the end of this pandemic, as we have vaccinations available for people, wouldn't you think at this particular point in time that Bill Gates and Jake Tapper would be really asking the question, which is, how did this pandemic start? Why don't we find out actually where it came from, how it was developed, and how it was released, and holding the country accountable for doing it, namely China. Why don't we find out all of those questions, the answers to all of those questions? But instead, it's always finger pointing to a president of the United States who had this literally dropped on his lap. And look, I know that we have critics out there who are going to say, oh, it's because you don't take the pandemic seriously. Podcast listeners, I take the pandemic very seriously. But you know what I take equally seriously is liberty. I take liberty really seriously because our liberties have been taken away, and these particular news outlets are using the taking away of our liberties to increase their ratings because they know that pandemics sell. They figured that out. So Bill Gates was asked by Jake Tapper, how about a future pandemic that might occur under Biden? And so Bill Gates gives a typical globalist response. Herein lies what Bill Gates is really up to. We have that clip, and here it is.
Clear, and I talked with the president-elect about that, and you know, I think our foundation will be part of that dialogue to make sure we don't blow it again.
What more can you tell us about that conversation? When did it happen? Does he want you to supervise some sort of preparedness task force? What more can you tell us about it?
Well, he's picked good people to play the official roles. And so I think for myself, for my wife, Melinda, for our experts, simply being in discussions with them is how we can best contribute. And as you've seen, it's a talented group. You've got a whole set of skill sets there. You know, he brings a view that America succeeds when the rest of the world succeeds. So
globalism, folks, that is what Bill Gates is really after here, right? I think he's after the profit motive for sure. But he's also after globalism because Bill Gates, has already had a conversation with Joe Biden about how Bill Gates can help because, after all, Joe Biden doesn't put America first. Joe Biden is saying, well, what's good for the rest of the world is good for America. No, actually, that's not necessarily true. In fact, we've just shown with the pandemic it's not true. But instead, once again, of Bill Gates being interested in holding China accountable, they want to make sure instead that we all sing kumbaya with China and that we assist them and that we continue to outsource our jobs to China, because Bill Gates gets richer when that happens, right? He still holds an enormous stake in Microsoft, and who knows what other companies that he holds an enormous stake in. And we know for a fact, we absolutely know for a fact that Bill Gates, without question, it's all, in my opinion, it's most definitely about globalism. It's about the money. And if he really, truly wanted to hold China accountable, he could have. But nonetheless, CNN's Jake Tapper and MSNBC, they both know that if they can keep you engaged to their channels, that it will continue to help their ratings soar, because you're going to watch them, because you're going to be in fear, constant fear, not just about this pandemic, and not just about the fact that they want to extend this pandemic as long as they can to show how Joe Biden is such a hero. But in addition to that, they want to keep you glued to the channel about the next pandemic, which hasn't even happened yet. And of course, we all agree, podcast listeners, that we don't want any more pandemics after this one. Guess where most of them come from? China! Let's have that discussion. But there's no way in God's green earth that Joe Biden is going to have that discussion and is going to ever hold them accountable. And we know Bill Gates isn't either. And that is the pandemic good for MSNBC's ratings? So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. And Mr. Assistant Producer, do we have a lead up to the dumbest bill in America? And here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is California erases Abraham Lincoln. Yes, you heard that correctly. California erases Abraham Lincoln. That's because Abraham Lincoln didn't support Black Lives Matter. I'm going to read this for you. You're not going to believe it. But we also have a series of clips we want you to listen to as well about this particular dumbest bill in America. So it happened in San Francisco. So a San Francisco district is planning to rename a school named after Abraham Lincoln because the former president did not demonstrate that Black lives mattered to him. So, a San Francisco district is planning to rename a school named after Abraham Lincoln because the former president did not demonstrate that Black lives mattered to him. You heard that correctly. We have a series of clips from the San Francisco Unified School District, and these are the individuals who participated in the renaming, not just of the Abraham Lincoln School, but also other schools, George Washington, because these are all really bad people. And first up is a first grade teacher who apparently somehow managed to get on this committee. He got on the committee somehow as a first grade teacher that allows them to rename schools, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, whatever, because they don't like the name and because people are triggered in the greater San Francisco Unified School District. This gentleman's name is Jeremiah Jeffries. Well, Jeremiah Jeffries talks about, what he thinks about all this. We have that clip, and here it is.
So, hello everyone, I'm Jeremiah Jeffries. I'm a first grade teacher at Reading Elementary School. So going through the school renaming process has been actually really great for my teaching because it really has made me think about and source sort of who we're lifting up and why. And I've learned so much about the history of San Francisco schools.
Yeah, he's learned so much about the history of San Francisco schools, but apparently doesn't like Abraham Lincoln's history because he didn't support Black Lives Matter. What? Black Lives Matter didn't exist. The group did not exist, we're talking about, during Abraham Lincoln's time. And, I mean, do you really think that you're that much better than Abraham Lincoln, that you can find a better name? Well, here's Jeremiah Jeffries again. Once again, he's the first grade school teacher in the district. And he's talking about, maybe we should name some of these school buildings after teachers, because they're school buildings. Not Abraham Lincoln, but after teachers. We have that clip, and here it is.
We will recognize any of the teachers who are nominated and who do that work, who meet the criteria. And there's basically just 3 years of experience doing social justice work. And so it's really incredible. Like for me, I hear the stories, and in some ways I want to do more. But also it's affirming because I see a lot of the work that I do reflected in the nominations as well. And the stories that people tell about educators, I see things that I do myself. So I know in some ways that the work I also give is also being appreciated and felt. So it's a pretty incredible process.
Beware of the people that always use the pronoun I like 20 times in a sentence. I, which is what this guy just did, of course. Obviously, it's all about him. It's all about Jeremiah Jeffries, because what he wants, really, if you really listen to that closely, what he wants is not just to name high schools and elementary schools and middle schools after teachers. He wants one of them named after himself. That's why he's part of it. It's literally kind of what he's alluding to, because after all, if your name is Jeremiah Jeffries, even though you've never heard of him, he's just a little more virtuous than Abraham Lincoln. I mean, come on, he's got to be a little bit more virtuous, because you got to make sure that, that he actually is, named after a school. So we have a bunch of articles that have come out about this, and we have a third clip, by the way, too, which you're really going to laugh at. So, but Jeremiah Jeffries, apparently his parents, and we have this here, this article. First up, it says, San Francisco to rename Abraham Lincoln High School because former president did not demonstrate that Black Lives Matter to him, as woke renaming committee also takes aim at Democrat Senator Dianne Feinstein, because apparently Dianne Feinstein once put a flag of the Confederacy and flew it up in San Francisco many, many, many years ago. So they're on this complete rant to get rid of anyone's name, because if there was any mistake that they had made, including mistakes that they weren't even aware that existed, for like another 150 or 160 years, they could be canceled. So Jeremiah Jeffries, whom you just heard, he's the man in charge of school renaming, whose parents were members of the Nation of Islam, and that inspired him. So here's what it says. The guy that you just heard says, the man behind the renaming of 44 of San Francisco's schools is a first-grade teacher who is influenced by his parents, both prominent members of the Nation of Islam, who set up their own Islamic school. Jeremiah Jeffries, chairman of the renaming committee, revealed in an interview that his mother told him there's nothing mysterious about progression. It's working instead of wishing. She and her husband set up the sister Clara Muhammad School that serve a predominantly African-American Muslim population. The Nation of Islam, which they're part of, which is defined as an organized hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, because it is a hate group, for its racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-gay teachings and rhetoric of black superiority over whites. Jeffries also led San Francisco's largest school boycott, when he encouraged 200 families to send their children to protest the closure of a school rather than to their actual educational lessons. That happened back in 2006. In 1999, Jeffries hit headlines nationwide when he held a protest against teachers spending their own money on school supplies. The San Francisco School District increased the school supply budget for the first time in decades as a result. He has always carved out a reputation as a power broker for the district, blah, 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 blah. So that gives you some background on good old Jeremiah Jeffries. Basically, he grew up in an incredibly racist family, and he would have to, right? Because in order to hate on all people, Abraham Lincoln, you probably would have to be a racist yourself. What other explanation could you have? I mean, he just thinks he's a bit more virtuous than Abraham Lincoln. So here's another guy, Mark Sanchez. He's the president of the Board of Education in this same district. So Mark Sanchez talks about, the issue of renaming and how, we're really trying to help students. We have that clip, and here it is.
I know what it means when the district, the quote unquote district, tells, mandates, asks, suggests that we do something new and different. It's always one more thing on our plate, and that's many times not okay. Usually the things that we're asking principals to do are compliance oriented and have actually nothing to do with the classroom, nothing to do with the students and families that actually go to the school. We're asking principals and their communities to do something I think they should embrace. which is to actually work together to provide a new name for the school. I think that's an exciting opportunity.
So we're asking for people to help us, including students and parents, to come up with some new names for all these schools. And principals really aren't supposed to, help students anyway. So we're helping the principals, help us. And we don't want the principals to spend time with the students. We want them to spend time on, stuff that really matters, like renaming schools. What is happening in California? I mean, and this guy is the guy this is the best you can do as president of the Board of Education in the greater San Francisco area? Really? This is the best you can do? So he went on to say, and we don't have a clip on this, but we're going to describe it. So Mark Sanchez, went on to say that, maybe one idea that we should do, and you should have seen it because it was a Zoom call with like 4 or 5 people, including Jeremiah Jeffries and some others who are part of the school district and part of the school board, elected members of the school board. They said, one thing that we should do is name a school after Michelle Obama. And you should have seen all their faces. They're all like, oh my gosh, that's so wonderful, Michelle Obama. Because, we should probably put Michelle Obama's name instead of Abraham Lincoln because, Michelle Obama is just so much better than Abraham Lincoln. Now, to be fair, they did not rename Abraham Lincoln High School after Michelle Obama. I'm not sure what name they're going to choose yet. All I know is there's not going to be an Abraham Lincoln High School anymore in the San Francisco Unified School District. So, I mean, you've hit rock bottom in California when you think that you're just better than Abraham Lincoln and you're better than George Washington and that you can engage in all this revisionist history to make yourself feel that you're so much superior to them. And if you watch any of these Zoom calls with this school board and the Unified School District, you will convince yourself how incredibly nutty these people have gotten in California. And that is the dumbest bill in America. California races Abraham Lincoln. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.